My name's Iheoma.
Hi, I'm Isabella.
I'm Ben.
I'm Meg.
Hi Lewis, thanks for joining me. So in this series we're doing some of the unspoken truths about lockdown. I was thinking about this in terms of like partnerships, like when people are in a relationship, that I've seen a lot of articles and people talking about adults having to negotiate kind of whether they're going to be with their partner, or blended families where people are having to decide which house they're going to stay in and which parent they're going to see. But I haven't seen so much stuff about teenagers, and in terms of like how teenagers are navigating whether they see or whether they're able to kind of see their boyfriends or girlfriends, or whoever they're kind of having relationships with. Have you got any insight into that or thoughts about it?
Well, they've had to make sacrifices because it's a really weird time and nothing's normal. And I think young people's relationships, maybe more than adult relationships, rely on immediacy and intimacy. Like if you're in school together, you do see each other every day, and it's a strange contrast to suddenly being completely on your own.
Yeah.
But I think young people are really understanding of it. I think there has been a lot of negativity in the media about young people and breaking lockdown rules and being selfish. But I think ultimately most people have realised the wider impact of potentially doing that, and have had to make quite mature decisions about it.
How do you think people are dealing with that, like not being able to be, not being able to see boyfriends or girlfriends or partners or whatever?
I mean, it's really the fact, like, it's not as much of an issue when you miss someone and they miss you back, because then you know that you're both looking forward to that. So you don't, even though you don't have them physically there, that you're both thinking about each other a lot.
Yeah.
Social media definitely makes it easier, being able to keep in contact, video call. There's so many challenges that have been going around, which I've personally find annoying a lot, but it keeps you busy, it keeps you going. You find ways around it.
I know quite a few people whose relationships have kind of ended, particularly early on, if it wasn't like a very established relationship, or if there were things kind of going, and I think dealing with all of that and like ending school and ending university, and it feels a bit odd doing it in this vacuum almost.
Yeah, like doing it in like a weird kind of virtual world where in reality a lot of these things are a lot nicer just to end in person.
Yeah.
Amongst my friends, like I know a couple of my mates are living in like their respective family homes, and they haven't been able to like see their partners at all, basically, especially in London, because some of them don't drive, which means like the only way they can get to each other is by public transport. Obviously you can't do that, so it's strange. Like I know like some of my best mates haven't seen like their partners for months, which is really it's actually quite wild, because like I'm not saying like they're over involved in each other's lives, but they spend a lot of time together and like they're really fruitful together. So to kind of have that separation for a very long amount of time, it's sad, but they're managing to get through. They are just kind of like communicating in alternative methods. They're doing what they can, basically.
It's like making do with what we've got, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is really tough. I think there's this there is, like, I've seen on the internet a lot of like people talking about the difficulty of being separated, but less talk about the difficulty of being together. And like I'm someone who really needs my space, and thankfully that's something that me and my girlfriend were able to negotiate before coronavirus outbreak. But yeah, I think it's really difficult. There's both ways the stress is created, being locked in with somebody or separated with somebody. Tension.
Yeah, and also if you physically don't have the room to be in separate spaces from each other, then that's as well. And I mean, like, I guess for most people in relationships, like in normal times, you would spend quite a lot of your day not with each other, wouldn't you? Unless you work together, I guess. So it is quite a novel way of kind of, testing that part of relationships.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think that relationships at this age are taken seriously enough? Like, I mean, because if I had a partner, it would be I would find it really, really difficult to not be with them in this period. But at the same time, it wouldn't necessarily be possible because of complicated family stuff. So do you think that, like, if I went and said to my friends, I'm having this problem and I would get lots of understanding and kind of empathy and all the rest of it. Do you think that empathy and understanding about how hard that is not being with your partner is extended to your generation or not?
I think it is to a certain degree, but maybe not completely, because I don't know, people at this age seem to expect that you will outgrow a relationship and they won't last together forever. But I know people from school who've been in relationships for 3 or 4 years, and I know people will be in a new relationship now that might last that long. And I don't think you can tell, and I don't think you can discriminate against young or new relationships within young people purely because they're young. But I don't think that serious relationships should be undermined, because ultimately they have the power to last, and if people are in love and want to make it work, they will.
What else do you think is kind of like, or has been happening, that doesn't get talked about as much? Like,
I think the main thing that like stood out to me on this is like sexual health and like intimacy, because I feel like that's never really talked about with young people, like, ever. And I always find that so strange, because it's not uncommon to know that children from like a really young age, there is like sexual exploration, because they realize that their bodies are different and they're like, oh, what's that? What does this do? And like that happens, like it does happen. And you do find that really young kids as well do stimulate themselves, and then they only kind of get told not to do it. It's like, oh, don't do that here, that's like a private activity, and they're like, I don't understand, I'm just having a bit of fun. So there is, I feel like from a young age, there's a lot of stigma and kind of like embarrassment put on self-pleasure, and it's never really talked about, really talked about. And then you kind of get older and you realize that everybody's done stuff. And
it's weird, because I think that, again, it's this idea of like binary. So there's like, sexual health lessons at school or whatever in PSHE. And then there's some like all these amazing things on the internet and like Instagram with people very openly talking about sex and sexuality and intimacy and all that kind of stuff. Like May is masturbation month, apparently.
Yeah.
Apparently it's time to take it slow. So that's, I think that's a good message for everyone. But like, so it's almost like we've got these like one way of talking about it and then another way of talking about it, which is like the complete opposite. And I know that whenever I went to run workshops in schools, particularly like self-pleasure would come up a lot, normally put forward as a joke or like, to see what my reaction would be to it. But especially when we were doing workshops around stress and like, how we can kind of deal with stress. It's a really valuable tool. And if we don't know that about ourselves, it's really disempowering, I guess, is what I would think.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I feel like, I guess it kind of ties into a binary aspect that you're talking about. Like, I feel there's been a lot of, oh, you're either like really sexually open and borderline a bit of a kink, or you're a prude. And you're just like, I don't understand like where these two like extremes have come from. Like, and then there'll be times like, oh no, I don't do that. I can never do that. I'm like, but it's your body. Like, it's just fundamentally learning about yourself in another aspect. It's like, it's your body, it's not gross, it's just part of you, and you can learn to love that.
Do you think your generation's getting better at it, or what do you think the issues are?
Do I think my generation is better around sex discussions? Yeah.
Voice of your generation.
I think yes, in some aspects, because like we were kind of saying before, you have social media, there is like a lot of discussion. People are sharing experiences. Like, oh, I can't remember whose account it was, but it was really funny. And they essentially did like an open question on the Instagram of like sexual experiences that you kind of like self-pleasure ones that you had when you were younger. And they gathered them all in from like those different people who identified as female. And they just kind of shared them on the story like anonymously. And it was really funny because they then posted like another story after that, just of like people's responses being like, I thought I was the only one. I didn't realize like this was just me. And like that kind of thing is really refreshing. And yeah, I do feel as time has gone on, so yeah, like with people more my age, they are just more happy and more open to discuss these kind of things. But I don't know so much with like younger people. I feel like there is still some kind of like shame and stigma attached to just like talking about sex.
Like obviously sex and intimacy and like self-love is one area, and then, you know, things like menstruation and, you know, all those kind of things that still have those taboos around them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like, I remember being at university and I was saying something about having my period or whatever, and then someone really reacting, going, "Oh God, we always know when you've got your period because we always talk about it." But you know, because maybe I was a bit more, I don't know. Anyway, but then years in the future, we've had that, you know, because we've stayed friends. We had a conversation that actually, she found that really hard that I was so open about it.
Yeah.
Because it was quite confronting for her. And so I'm really interested in how we can broach these topics and have these conversations without, you know, like to be able to show people that, you know, this is important stuff to know. And, you know, like you said about the thread about going, oh, I never knew, I thought I was the only one, like breaking some of that stuff, but without kind of really upsetting people or like turning people off the conversation, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the answer to this at all. I wish I did, because it's like, so it is, there are topics that for some people it borderlines on it, like the topic being crass, and that they just like, I just can't be involved in this. This is just like so far from where I am. I guess, I don't know. I literally don't know. Maybe like once somebody that they're close to or somebody that represents them starts talking about those kind of things, then they'll be like, okay, well, like this person's quite similar to me. Maybe like if they're doing it, maybe it's a conversation that I can have too. But that does really rely on certain people kind of like voicing what that's going on for them, which could be really scary. Like if you are in cultural environment where talking about that stuff just isn't a thing, and even though you're happy to be that voice, you also do risk like being exiled or having like a lot of judgment placed upon you, which would then mean you kind of lose that community that you're in. So,
yeah, I mean, it's like the stakes are higher for some people than they are for others, I guess. And, you know, depending on what they kind of, their own personal take on it as well. But I think like peer education and folk knowledge is like really powerful. Like that is the way that we learn about stuff. It's just, I suppose, and that's one of the things I think is quite exciting about social media and things like Instagram, is that people are able to access now lots of different kind of narratives around different topics. Bye.
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 Cool.
Bye. Bye.
bye. My name's Iheoma.
I'm Ben.
I'm Meg.
Hi Lewis, thanks for joining me. So in this series we're doing some of the unspoken truths about lockdown. Okay, so one thing that's definitely come up quite a lot is like people's housing situation. So where they are for lockdown, how that's kind of played out, how much choice they've got over where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that's one that's very much, I think, well, it's more dictated by age, because obviously, you know, I, as an adult, get to kind of choose where I want to live and where I'm going to be for lockdown to a certain extent. but like my kids don't.
Yeah. In my own personal experience, I've been like kind of semi-fortunate because I have my family home in London and then I have my flat here in Bristol. And just at the beginning, I was with my family, but then I was worried that lockdown was going to get stricter and the restrictions were going to get worse. And I was like, no, I can't do this. I need to leave. Because once you've kind of stepped away from home for quite a bit, like I haven't lived in my family home like for a prolonged time for quite a while, then to kind of go back into that bubble and you're like, I'm definitely like a grown up, but I'm also like a child right now. And it's like a really weird kind of medium.
Because obviously when you move away and you have limited contact with your family, you can sort of choose which parts of your life you share with them. Like you don't lie, but you just don't share absolutely everything. But when you're all squished together, it's really hard to not end up sharing everything.
Yeah, so I mean, this is something that I'm really interested in, particularly for people sort of under the age of 18 in particular, because it's that thing that you might be a very different person out in the world than you are to your family. And even if you don't have any obvious like identity kind of things going on, we do all behave differently with our families than we do.
Yeah,
when we're
with
on our
like your
own.
mates. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, like you said, we do have that. Sometimes it's not even like a proper like strict difference, like this is who I am with my friends, this is who I am with my family, but there are like certain nuances that your friends know about that your family may not know about. It's like two sides of the same coin. So I feel like sometimes when you kind of lose that other side, it's a bit like, oh, am I still me? Is it like a whole, like you're missing a part of who you are?
Coming home and having to have your home personality the whole time is a real struggle.
Yeah, I know that we've seen that in our work, because obviously we do a lot of stuff with two of our projects with LGBTQ plus, and also from like BAME backwards and stuff. And if people are still in that process of working out their identity, or have an identity that's quite different outside the home than it is inside the home, then that causes quite a lot of problems, really.
I think it definitely puts a strain on for a lot of people, especially people, yeah, like you were saying, who haven't necessarily come out yet to their families, or people who, I don't know, live in a religious household and don't necessarily share all the same beliefs. It can be quite difficult.
Because I work with like young LGBTQ plus youth, some of the home environments are not very nice home environments. They're hostile environments where they're not able to really express their identity. Some of them still aren't out yet. So there's definitely a lot of fear and worry around that.
I know a couple of people have been talking about having to share space at home and not necessarily having a lot of that.
Really having, lots of family members around, pretty tight, small spaces, around the clock, 24/7, for the entirety of lockdown. So the idea of privacy and, some alone time for whatever reason, whether that's just disconnect from, just life in general and just have some time to escape, or whether that's to access, some of the therapeutic services that Off the Record and Zazie offers, that opportunity to access privacy has been a big one when it comes to, some of the young people that we're working with. The idea of being able to just access therapy and just have it just known and everyone cool with it is something that isn't necessarily transferable to, the communities that Zazie works in. For a lot of people, their access to therapy is something that they keep very private, because mental health itself is stigmatized and it's kind of demonized and it's kind of looked down upon. Talking about mental health in any capacity, whether something as simple as, feeling quite down today, or I think I'm a little bit, anxious. Those things sometimes are completely kind of discarded. So the idea of just being able to say, yeah, I'm just going to chat to my therapist today in a house that's already really crammed and
it's packed, yeah.
Yeah, it's an impact on, the way in which young people are living during this time.
I know quite a lot of young people who have to share rooms with their siblings. So to have that energy around you all the time, so it's not even like you can get away to your room, because your room is somebody else's room as well, and it's just a lot of different energies going around the household.
And yeah, I share a single room with my sister. in a tiny house with 2 enormous dogs. Like, there's not enough space to breathe.
Like, it would be different if we could kind of break out and kind of take a break from each other. But when you're all just kind of enclosed in one space, and then you want to have your own space, but that space is sharing, it would be really hard.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's a psychological space and it's the physical space as well, isn't it? Was there like a period of sort of adjustment when you were all back in the kind of home, sort of in this period? Was it like, did you have to go through sort of a period where you worked out how to make it work almost?
Yeah, I think there were issues with space, but now we've sort of got to the point where it's okay to say, can you go out of our room for a bit because I really need to breathe.
It's kind of, it takes up a big like part of your mind, I suppose. When someone else is in the room, you might not be able to fully relax, or you kind of have to think about their needs as well, for attention or space as well. So you might be wanting to see them and they don't want to, and that can create tension.
I was thinking about this, and particularly about the idea of space, because lots of the stuff that's being put out about well-being and about like looking after your mental health, do you ever get the feeling that a lot of those ideas are kind of built very much from a place of privilege, in that lots of those well-being kind of suggestions are only really possible if you have certain things in place? I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's, most of it is, and I say most, you know, there's obviously, I would say over the last couple of years, we've started to have more kind of neutral dialogue around mental health, in terms of, you know, acknowledging that not everyone's experience is the same. But I think by and large, there is a lot of assumptions about dealing with mental health that does come from a place of privilege. You know, something, you know, simple as what I said earlier on was like, just talk about it, you know, let your feelings out. You know, for a lot of, you know, young people, young BAME people in the community, that is just like, just totally not something that they can even consider themselves doing, because like I said before, it's stigmatized, it's heavily stigmatized. But that's the more extreme end of the case, right? But I think some of the general stuff, you know, like self-care, or you know, taking time for yourself, and taking time to look after yourself, and taking time to have time by yourself, these are all things that are privileges, you know, for a lot of people, to have that space, or have that time to engage in a self-care routine, when, you know, some of the people we're working with, again, are not only managing themselves as a young person, some of them are managing themselves as carers, some of them are managing themselves as students, some of them are managing themselves as all three. So
Yes,
like,
lots of different identities.
Exactly, and to be able to just disconnect and you know, engage in some self-care is difficult.